You've just gotten home from your local game shop. You bought 2-3 KeyForge decks maybe. You hurry home and you open them up. And there it is. One of them seems playable, or fun, or something. You ask your friend for his opinion, and he says it seems good too. You check the SAS score just to be sure, and yeah, it's really high actually. So now you got a new deck you want to play. But how do you play it?
Hi, my name is Torvald. And about a week ago I was in that exact situation. I just opened a Worlds Collide display and I gotten 2 very good decks. And that's where the inspiration for this video came from. I was thinking about the best way to quickly learn a new deck. And a quick disclaimer before this is that KeyForge is a game that prides itself on being unique. And that's both its player base and its decks. And everybody has a different way of learning their new decks. This is just my way of going through it. So this is my guide to getting to know your new deck. So the first step, I think, is going through your deck and just getting the raw numbers.
So, this is by far the longest step, but it's necessary to get an overview over what your deck is capable of and just get you started on getting to know your deck. So, get your deck stats. Either go onto Decks of KeyForge or count it yourself. Figure out how many creatures, how many artifacts, how many upgrades, how many Ember pips, how many actions, how much denial, how much draw or archive, and then we can draw some conclusions. So most decks won't have a lot of Ember pips, and if you have fewer than around 20-22 Ember pips, you probably need to do something else than just play cards to be able to win the game. You'll have to set up other ways of getting Ember, like setting up a board you can reap with, or using cards like Cleansing Wave or Misery Exploit or Stealing or Interdimensional Graft or some other way to get that Ember you need to forge your keys with. If you have more than 17 creatures in your deck is going to be fairly creature heavy, and you won't have too hard a time, hopefully, establishing a board. A lot of your Ember is also going to come from reaping with these creatures. A very action heavy deck is generally a bit harder to play and pilot, as there'll be more decision making involved in the deck, at least if a lot of the actions are focusing on your opponent. If they're focusing on you, it's not going to be as difficult. A lot of your Ember in action heavy decks is also going to come from pips on your actions. That's also why actions are so good, as even if you can't use the action's effect, a lot of the time there is a pip attached to that action, which will make it useful to play in your turn, as it'll help you raise to your 3 keys. Denial is quite important. Knowing if you can stop your opponent can greatly affect your game plan. For example, when choosing whether to fight an opposing creature off the table or reap, you'll more often choose to reap when you know you can deny the potential Ember gain your opponent is going to have. Draw and archiving cards are about increasing the consistency and efficiency of your deck. These are going to help you cycle through your deck faster, as well as keep answers for when they're needed in the game. Without these, you're going to need to make some hard decisions about whether or not to keep key cards at certain points of the game or discard them to increase your efficiency. Now that was just to give you a general idea of what kind of deck you're playing, but you gotta start somewhere, you know.
Then after that, I like to sit down and get a bit more specific. I like to check for key cards in the deck.
Now, what are these key cards I was talking about earlier? Well, key cards can be broken into 2 different categories: answers and game winners. When looking for key cards that are answers, you'll be looking for things like board clears. That contains gateway to this, key to this, axiom of risk, unnatural selection, the likes. Cards that are gonna clear the table, reduce the creature clutter, and help you get back in the fight. There are also semi-clears like Hysteria, Blinding Lights, Lost in the Woods, or Nature's Call. You'll also be looking for spot removal. Spot removal are cards like Gongoozle or Nerve Blast, or Relentless Whispers, or Twin Bolt Mission, or Flame Wake Shaman. Cards that can generally take out witches or Sudokins, or cards that are going to be a big problem if they stay on the board. And the last in the answer category of key cards are big denials. Some good examples of big denials are cards like E on the Fringes, Too Much to Protect, Doorstep to Heaven, or Burn the Stockpile. Cards that are going to help you get your opponent's amber down to a manageable level. Knowing which of these you have also means knowing which of these you lack. If you don't have much spot removal, you're gonna need creatures on the board to clear eventual threats, like a Sudokin or a Hunting Witch or Witch of the Eye or Restringances. If you don't have board clears, you're gonna need to establish board control quickly or have ways of winning that circumvent the board. And if you lack big denies, you're gonna need to outpace your opponent or make sure they don't gain too much amber. Figuring out what you lack and how you can compensate for it is key. Game winners, you'll be looking for cards like key cheats. Good examples of key cheats are Key Charge or Chodohazri, Key Abduction, Triumph, Epic Quest, or Might Make Right. You'll be looking for big bursts. Some cards that can give you big bursts are Hunting Witch, Virtuous Works, I Need Rupture, E on the Fringes. You'll also be looking for big draws, cards like Library Access, Professor Sudokin, Martian Generosity, or Battle Fleet. And the last category in game winners I'm just going to call others because they don't really fit into any of the categories, but they can definitely help you win the game. These are cards like Shreks or Brachus, or maybe they're the leaders like Valgerico or Lord Invidious. Single creature cards mostly that don't really fit into any of the other categories, but when they hit the board, they're gonna need to be dealt with because they're gonna win you the game potentially. When you know your game winners, you know which cards to protect or which cards to set up for. You might take a weaker turn in order to set up for a really strong turn with a key card next turn. For example, using Lash to tax massively with too much to protect on the next turn.
Information of KeyForge Video 95. Lines of Play. Lines of play are an important part of any KeyForge learning experience. Lines of play are about knowing how you win best to aid your decision making. You have many lines of play in one deck, and each one basically translates into a different way your deck can win the game. We'll be back soon with a guest presenter to elaborate. But first, a commercial break. Cocaine. It's the drug of the century, but...
Finding your key cards, and especially your game winners, also ties into the next step, which is finding your ideal lines of play. You do this to figure out how you can win the game most efficiently if your opponent doesn't disrupt your line of play. A big one here is if you have the necessary efficiency or just a lot of creatures to flood the board and reap out. That's going to give you so much amber per turn. And if your creatures are beefy enough, you might be able to do that. Maybe you burst out a few turns with Untamed and just forge from your big stack of amber the rest of the game. Maybe you get your key cheats off. Or maybe it involves getting specific combos off. Like Miasma into Too Much to Protect, Binary Eruption, Dimensional Craft, Martian Generosity, Key Abduction, the likes. The reason you do this is to get a basic idea of where your decision making should lead you. If you know how you win best, it's a lot easier to figure out complicated hands like 2-2-2 hands. Of course, there are other ways to figure out your complicated hands. Check out my video on card counting for that one.
That was one of the more fun parts to figure out. What's the best thing you can get off? Now it's time to look at what can possibly stop you from getting that off.
Now, once you've figured all of this out, hyped up your deck, figured out what can do super well, how can I win with this deck, then it's time to take off your rose-tinted glasses. We have to look at your deck in a negative light now. We need a reality check. What can disrupt this perfect plan of yours? How can your opponent destroy your dreams? Maybe you burst a lot of amber, but your opponent has that pesky interdimensional craft, or maybe even a Too Much to Protect. then what do? That burst might not be good all of a sudden. And you might need to either make your burst more gradual, wait it out until your opponent has played their answers, or find a different way to win. This step is all about figuring out troublesome cards or combos that might show up in your opponent's deck list and how to deal with them. This is also in order to help your decision making. Maybe your line of play gets totally out of whack if you can't establish board control. And you need to chain yourself by holding on to your board clear you draw at the start of your game to make sure you don't lose it. Or maybe you don't have a counter to a specific disruption in your lines of play. And then you just need to find different lines of play you can win games with, since it seems your original line of play won't work for at least one matchup. A lot of the decision making you need to figure out in this step, and that I can't really help you with because of the unique nature of the game, is which cards are you going to keep in hand, which cards are you going to archive, to make sure that your opponent's answer cards don't fuck up your game too much. And when you followed all of this, it's time to start playing the deck. A lot. Like, a lot. You can go play online on the Crucible or the new Knowledge is Power. You can go to locals, or you can play with friends. Personally, I'd recommend locals or friends, if you have some, because that allows you to get a lot more feedback on your play after the game. You can ask about a specific play. If I'd done this instead of this, do you think you would have had an answer to it? And by virtue of that, improve yourself and also help others improve by giving feedback on their lines of play. And when you've played your deck a lot, you're gonna start to notice combos or interactions or usefulness of cards you didn't notice before. And when that happens, it's time to begin going over your deck again. Look at all your lines of play and combos in a new light. Alter them and maybe even come up with some new ways of playing your deck that you didn't think of before. Because that's really the true beauty of this card game. Since every deck is unique, there's always a matchup you haven't played. And that also means that there's always a side of your deck that you might not have explored. So get out a new deck and start playing it. Thank you.